Thanks for that introduction. I appreciate that very much. It's great to be here with you today, and especially to talk about this idea of digital citizenship, which has been circulating around various kinds of academic technology conversations, public conversations as well, for some time. We've thought about information literacy, and there's still a lot of great work happening in that area. But somehow just being able to read a web page, as miraculous as that would have been 30 years ago before there was a web, didn't seem to be quite enough. So people started talking about fluency as the next thing, not just being able to look at something, but being able to speak the language effectively. That didn't seem to be quite enough either, because the world started to turn digital in some significant ways. So how do we live in a world that is increasingly digital, global, light speed, connected, at scale, in ways that we haven't seen before? And this idea of digital citizenship began to emerge. And that's what I want to explore with you today, first by absolutely muddying the waters with all sorts of complexity, and then miraculously boiling it down to one thing, which, if you don't remember anything else today, I hope is the thing that you will take away, because I think in the end, it's easy to get lost in the swarm. It's easy to be daunted by complexity, even though that's what we are living in the middle of. What is the thing, if you could call it the quark, if you could call it the elementary particle, or what I'm going to call today the franchise, a basic, without which not, right, of digital citizenship? So first, let's go back in time a little bit. This appears just about the time the World Wide Web is appearing, 1995. It's great, it's about that thick. In 1995, that's apparently all you needed to know. Every student's guide to the internet would get you hooked on to this amazing thing you may have heard about, the internet, and give you what you need to be effective on the internet. Well, what did that look like? In 1995, it looked like lists. These things always look like lists. So, in every student's guide to the internet, why there are parrots, I have absolutely no idea. Not the idea of citizenship or even good pedagogy. But never mind, we skip right over that to the tools. What do you need? Well, you need email. That's still here. Telnet. How many of you have used Telnet in the past year? Aha. How many of you used Telnet back in the day? Right? VT100 emulation for the win, right? And file transfer protocol. Anybody using FTP still? Yeah, a few people. Yeah, okay, good. Our students have no idea what any of that is. Email, they know that's what we use, and they don't. So that's partly what you need. And then when you're on the internet, you need more things. You need more tools. You need more bullet points. You need listservs. Still here. Usenet, not so much. Archie. Anybody remember Archie? Yeah. Wow, that was a while back. How about the Wide Area Information Service? WAIS? I don't think so. Gopher, HiTelNet, and then the World Wide Web, this exotic thing that was coming around in 1995, and it turned out that's what changed everything, except it didn't. So this is the end of every student's guide to the internet. It's this beautiful, the future is here and we are happy. The World Wide Web, bringing it all together. Yes, it was Mosaic, but in many respects, what you use now as a browser isn't all that different from Mosaic. The endless controversy about whether actually to put images on the web, it was highly controversial. We use up bandwidth. We didn't need pictures. We had words. That was settled. And so now the World Wide Web, you may have noticed, has images, cat videos, other things. And you get to the back of this book, and suddenly it looks like, yeah, this is it. We have arrived. What do we need? Well, we need to know these things. This was digital citizenship in 1995, or what passed for it, not that different from today. The concept behind the World Wide Web, how to use the World Wide Web, how to start a client, though nobody thinks about that anymore. How to open a universal resource locator. Oh, that's a vanishing idea. Oops. How to find information on a specific topic. Yes. How to perform subject-oriented searches. Yes. This is 5 years before Google, right? So we had to use all these other things. How to perform index searches. So 1995, some things still here, some things lost, but a decent attempt, first approximation at digital citizenship on the web, except it isn't. It is not digital citizenship. It's a set of skills, it's a set of things, but it is not digital citizenship, not yet. And what I want to do is start to go forward in time to think about why that's not quite what I mean by digital citizenship, and it's not what I tell my students when I talk to them about digital citizenship. All these things very important, but they don't get at my favorite saying about computers, which comes from Alan Kay. And it is this: the computer is an instrument whose music is ideas. Our students know about apps, they know about clicks, they know about touching things, they know all about that, but they don't know that the computer is an instrument whose music is ideas. And if you don't know that, you can't be a digital citizen. So now I have to think about, well, how do you unlock that music? Fortunately, I do have a clip of Alan Kay himself. From 1995, it was one of those waves of interest in Congress about the internet. Al Gore had invented it not that long ago. Actually, he didn't invent the internet, we know that, though it turns out he did kind of, but that's another talk, my in defense of Al Gore talk, but that's not today. So Alan Kay, this is a dream come true. Alan Kay, Seymour Papert, I would call him the Montessori of the digital age, and Chris Dede, who is now at Harvard's Grad School of Education and has done astonishing work with all sorts of computer-based simulations and environments, especially in K through 12. They all appeared in front of Congress to talk about what sorts of things educators could do with these technologies. And they did not say what the various representatives and senators thought they would say. In fact, depending on how you measure it, Alan Kay was probably all the way up to 11 in Spinal Tap units, trying to talk about how they were simply not asking the right questions. That what was happening was as far away from true musical computing, in his phrase, as that list is from digital citizenship. So this is what Alan Kay has to say. And you'll hear him talk about chopsticks culture, by which he does not mean the things you eat with. He means the things you bang on the piano and make. Do you know that song, Chopsticks? Right? Da, 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 da. Okay. He won't sing it to you, but just so you know. This is Alan Kay speaking before Congress in 1995.
If the issue were music, for instance, if America's parents were worried that their children wouldn't make it in life unless they became musicians by the time they left high school, we could imagine Congress or some state legislature coming up with the solution of let's put a piano in every classroom. And they would say, but unfortunately we don't have enough money to train the existing teachers or hire musicians, so what we'll do is we'll just give the existing teachers 2-week refresher courses in the summer on music, and that should solve our problem. And we know that music, as we know it, is not really going to get into the classroom. Now, the children will really enjoy having a piano in the classroom. They'll evolve a kind of chopsticks culture and maybe a little bit beyond, but that's basically what we're getting right now. So part of what Mathland is, and part of what any kind of environment for doing rich learning in, is one in which the adults are invested in it as well. I think this is the biggest problem that we have to deal with, because obviously American technology can produce as many computers for as low a cost as we need. We can saturate the entire world with computers, but to set up a sense of what its special music is going to be very, very difficult. And I think that is what we should be aiming our efforts at.
What is that special music that he describes? What is the thing that's not just banging on the piano that somebody bought and left in a room and then gave faculty 2 weeks, big time, every year to try to understand that music. Well, that's partly what I want to explore today, and even more than that, I want to explore what's stopped us from getting there. And to do that, I'm going to be doing the boiling down, step by step, to try to get to the sine qua non. What's the thing that we could start with to begin to release some of that music? And the first thing I think we need to start with is a concept. And the concept is a concept that links several things that don't seem to go together. A watch, for example, a farmer, for another example. These are concepts, but they're particular kinds of concepts. And there's a name for the concept. It's called the functional concept. A thing is defined by what it does. What makes it what it is something that already carries a kind of evaluative quality. This is all coming from a Scottish philosopher named Alistair MacIntyre in a book called After Virtue, A Study in Moral Theory, which may seem a very strange thing to bring into digital citizenship, but I don't think so. MacIntyre writes, there's a special character of the concept of a watch and of a farmer. Such concepts are functional concepts. That is to say, we define both watch and farmer in terms of the purpose or function which a watch or a farmer are characteristically expected to serve. So now the idea of digital citizenship, we can say, is a functional concept. You can't simply pass a test and be certified as a digital citizen. You can't be a digital citizen and just say, I am certified, I have a badge, I have a competency, I am this thing. To be a citizen is to think of citizen as a verb. It is to do things. It is to participate. It is what I will call to exercise the franchise. It is ironically what the World Wide Web and the internet before it were built to do, not to be passive receptacles of consumption or even the place that you tell people to be careful because they'll either get hijacked or they'll go into the bad part of town. It was a place for communication, for participation, for rich interaction, something like civics on a global scale. As it became more widespread, the web began to morph in that direction. This was very promising. There's a thing called Web 2.0. How many of you remember Web 2.0 as a term you may have heard? Coined, depending on, well, let's say popularized first in 2004 by a fellow named Tim O'Reilly. And this is a word cloud, which is itself a form of Web 2.0, a beautiful explanation of Web 2.0 in Wikipedia. And it defines it in a way that I think is interesting to think about. A Web 2.0 website may allow users to interact and collaborate with each other in a social media dialogue as creators of user-generated content in a virtual community, in contrast to the first generation of Web 1.0 era websites, where people were limited to the passive viewing of content. Now, this is interesting. It suggests that the web is also a functional concept, that it's not just a thing, it's a thing that immediately has to be experienced in terms of what it was designed for. What was it supposed to do? Interestingly, the very first web browser that Tim Berners-Lee had imagined carried with it the capacity to write to the web as well as read from the web in one environment. And it took a little while for the developers to catch up to that, but that's eventually what we got with Web 2.0. So to be on the web was to put things on the web, not simply to watch things, download things, read things on the web. So we're coming from 1995 up to 2004. Web 2.0 starts to push towards this music that Alan Kay described. And other people started working on this. Henry Jenkins, who was at MIT at the time, now he's at the University of Southern California, wrote a white paper in 2006, really epical. And if you haven't looked at it, I urge you to do it. It's quite a radical, I'd say it's almost a manifesto in many ways, confronting the challenges of participatory culture, media education for the 21st century. And he outlines 11 different modes of being, modes of participation that people would have to know to be able to be not just a consumer of the web, but a maker of the web. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them. I will list them for you just so you can see what sorts of things Jenkins was thinking about. The ability to play or tinker, the ability to perform, to be different kinds of voices, simulations of rich environments and what ifs, to be able to take what's on the web, remix it, chop it up, make it into something new. The ability not to, he called it multitasking. We know that's not really a human capability, at least not yet. The day is young. But the ability to scan something quickly, make sense of it, get the gist of it very quickly. New York City subway is a great web for that kind of gisting activity. And sometimes you have a lot of time to do that because the train isn't right there yet. It talks about collective intelligence, how all of us are smarter than any of us is. About judgment, being able to look and evaluate very quickly. Is that promising? Is that not promising? Is it real? Is it fake? Transmedia navigation, which is the ability to say, here's what I'm trying to say in words, in pictures, in sounds, in video, in something tactile, in a haptic environment. Networking, which for Jenkins meant not just taking stuff in, but putting stuff onto the network. And then negotiation, how to be among different environments, different kinds of people, and to be able to somehow connect them, bring them together. We do have some of these environments. They just tend not to appear in higher ed, typically, although I see that Fordham is an exception. For example, Wikipedia is a beautiful example of the kinds of participatory culture Henry Jenkins talks about, the kinds of things that Web 2.0 was meant to do. This is a little more exotic, but it repays some time. How many of you have been to the Reddit subforum Today I Learned? Okay, how many of you work as teachers in this environment? 17 million people are on the Reddit subforum Today I Learned, and it's going to talk about your negotiation. It's all over the place. Today I learned a bidet is considered a key green technology. Today I learned that too because I looked it up, right? Who knew? Today I learned after JFK was prescribed use of a rocking chair to ease back pain, he enjoyed them so much he would give rocking chairs as gifts to friends, family, heads of state, etc. You can go down to find out how Comcast billed people during Hurricane Katrina. Unless they had a little bit of an outage, they would give you a little bit of credit for that. There we are. Here we are in the kind of rich environment that Alan Kay was describing. 17 million people subscribe to Today I Learned. And there's another one called I Want to Learn that in some respects is even more interesting. Now, you're going to find quite a hodgepodge here, just the way you'll find a hodgepodge in a library. So you need to develop certain kinds of skills, certain kinds of citizenship to be able to find the stuff that you're interested in, to be able to contribute to the places where you can add the most value. But it's fascinating. It's that place where that music sounds. And then you have the course management system, which is remarkably music-free. It has nothing. It has content. And anyone who believes that higher learning is about delivering content, we have a lovely spa weekend for you where we can get that out of your head. Delivering content, like delivering pizzas, right? So here's your content, sir. I don't think so. We live in a world that's flooded with content. Our job is connection. Our job is to facilitate habits of mind that connect things across domains, within domains, from one's life to another's life, from one location to another location. But we build these environments where there is no music that sounds And I would say there are no digital citizens here. So what is it that is lacking? Where is that music fled, as a poet once wrote? What is the thing, if we had to take it all the way down? Would we pick one of the items from Henry Jenkins' list? Would we pick one of the items from the word cloud about Web 2.0? We could, but I want to go all the way down. I want to think, what is it that actually makes a citizen a citizen? What is it that is the effective exercise of the functional concept of citizenship? And how might that map onto what we see in the internet today and on the web? So I finally came up with, and this is the first time I've talked about this, so this is a test, right? Not for you, it's a test for me. You can grade it and tell me, and I'll do better. It seems to me that the thing you must do if you are a citizen in a nation is exercise the franchise, which means vote. It starts there. If you don't vote, you're not represented. If you're not represented, how can you be a citizen? How can that be a participatory culture for you in a democracy? If you don't vote, how can you be a citizen? So I get interested, being an English professor, in the etymology of the word franchise. What does it mean? Where does it come from? Emerson tells us that language is fossil poetry, and I'm all about poetry, and I am rapidly becoming a fossil. So I thought, why don't we go and do this magic trick on Google? You know, you can do commands in the address bar. You can do define space word. The new thing you can do is etymology space word. So if you're logged onto the internet right now, please go play for 15 seconds, then come right back and do etymology space and then whatever word it is that you're interested in. You'll get the etymology. You'll also get a fascinating graph called an n-gram, because Google has digitized about 15%, I think, of the corpus of works written in English between about, 1400 and maybe 2008. You can see how words change over time and what their frequency of usage has become. It's not quite the Oxford English Dictionary, but it's pretty close, and it's right there. Everyone can do it. Etymology/franchise. And what do we get? Or not slash, sorry, etymology space franchise. This is what comes up. It denotes a grant of legal immunity. It's from the Old French. It's based on the word for free. Now, the sense in which we think about, McDonald's, Starbucks, whatever, that comes later in the 20th century because there's nothing that late-stage capitalism can't appropriate. But the root of it is to be free. To exercise the franchise is to be a citizen in a nation who, by exercising the franchise, enacts freedom. It's a liberatory kind of concept. And you'll see by looking at the n-gram that it has an amazing peak of usage around 1920 or so. Does anyone know what really major expansion of the franchise in the United States might have made that word pop about that time? Thank you. Say it loud, say it proud. Women's suffrage. Without the franchise, you can't be a citizen. And what this woman pointed out, and this is fresh stuff. I just was at the Morgan a couple of days ago. I was like, this will be good. This is Elizabeth Cady Stanton saying, I am a citizen, therefore I must have the franchise, because citizenship without the franchise is meaningless. You may call me a citizen. If I cannot vote, it doesn't mean anything. So the question I want to ask is, what's the voting on the web? What's the voting in the digital world? Where is the place you do something to enact the functional concept of digital citizenship in a way that is meaningful, that is fundamental, that's basic? And this is what I came up with. It's the hyperlink. That's all. There's lots of other stuff. You saw the Jenkins list, 11. Dot, 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 dot. But this is the equivalent, I would say, of the vote in digital citizenship. This is the equivalent of the franchise. And it is a franchise that is being lost. My students have started to forget what a URL is. They can't look at an address bar and say, oh, that's the top-level domain. Oh, this is what happens afterwards. They don't seem to be able to understand what that is. Of course, they're poking stuff on phones. That's great. I poke stuff on phones, too. It's no problem. Unless you forget. Unless you forget not just how to click on a link, but how to make a link. And you'll see here that just as citizen can be a noun and a verb, hyperlink is a noun and a verb as well. So some more backing for this assertion that the hyperlink is the franchise in digital citizenship. This is Tim Berners-Lee. In 1997, he invented the web, and he writes, there are some fundamental principles about links on which the web is based. These are principles that allow the world of distributed hypertext to work. It is difficult to emphasize how important these issues are for society. The First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, for example, addresses the right to speak. The right to make reference to something is inherent in that right. On the web, to make reference without making a link is possible, but ineffective, like speaking, but with a paper bag over your head. Which leads to the conclusion that if we and our students do not know how to link to things on the web, we are speaking with a paper bag over our heads. Now, many things follow from this. I'm going to explore some of them now, but this is really quite a startling thought. And this is Tim Berners-Lee shortly after he invented the software on which the web runs and donated it to the public domain, which is why we have a World Wide Web now. It doesn't cost anything to use hypertext markup language or the underlying architecture. And Berners-Lee had thought about this very carefully, and the idea of hypertext and linking was new, and how could it be done at scale? And it was actually controversial for a while. Should I get permission to link to something? And Berners-Lee said, no, permissionless hyperlinking is an essential form of freedom on the web. It is the potential to speak by linking that makes the web have a franchise. But to make his point, he asserted something interesting that turns out to be incorrect. But that's the next unfolding of the franchise. He writes in the same document, so the existence of the link itself does not carry meaning. Of course, the contents of the linking document can carry meaning, and often does. But about this, he was wrong. Two young guys at Stanford figured out he was wrong. Larry Page, Sergey Brin, you might have heard of them. Google, you've heard of Google. They had this idea that links were meaningful. And before Google, if any of you remember those sad days, when it was Alta Vista or nothing, if you Googled White House, you would get links to White Houses, and to white, and to house, and then somewhere in there would be the place where the president lives. Brin and Page invented this thing called Backrub, which then became PageRank, which then became Google. And it was their insight that if I make a link between one thing and another, that link did carry meaning for me. And if every individual act of connection were to be thought of as meaningful, and you indexed not the web by brute force, but you indexed it by indexing those connections, you'd be able to get White House, the place where the president lives, at the top of the page. Because most people, most of the time, would be meaning that. And you could tell that because when they tried to pull together their own part of the web, they would have linked to that. Not to the word white, not to the word house, not necessarily to pictures of White Houses at random. Most of them would have linked to the place the president lives. Now, there are no free lunches, nor is there pain-free digital citizenship. What we know today are link farms, spam, other sorts of abuses of the Brin page model have made our lives more complicated. But the idea is beautiful. And it works. It works for all of us every day. The link does carry meaning. The thing we find when we Google and the stuff comes out in order of relevance, most of the time, not infallibly, but most of the time, is the result of Google's analysis of our acts of meaning, our connections. So the question for me then becomes, if the hyperlink and the ability to link, which is blissfully free of any presence at all in something like Blackboard. Have you ever tried to make web pages inside of Blackboard? You can't really do it. Blackboard doesn't want you to do it. Why would you need to do that? It's sort of the AOL of education, if you remember that, except they don't give you the CD-ROMs, I don't think. How could we bring our students into an environment where the franchise of the hyperlink is theirs, thereby releasing the ability to make connections and imply meaning, and the music begins to sound? Well, all of us have someone who can explain the world to us. This is one of the people who will do that for me. His name is John Udell. It's Jon. If you Google, Udell is his last name. And early on, John became fascinated by these meaning-making properties of the World Wide Web. He wrote what I think of as another epical document in this journey to think about digital citizenship. He wrote a blog post called 7 Ways to Think Like the Web. And part of it will seem a little technical if you go there. He has a very helpful link up at the top to someone who's boiled it down even farther. This is what we do for each other. If you've enjoyed John Udell, you might also enjoy Doug Belshaw. And in this, Udell talks about how the properties of linking on the web are often counterintuitive. We don't really have things in the physical world that we can compare them to. I'm here, I'm not there. These words I'm speaking are these words I'm speaking right now. They don't exist everywhere all at once, unless you stream or unless you link to a document that has the text of my remarks, or unless you link to 5 documents that have the text. You see, when you get into the digital world, things begin to take on certain kind of quantum properties. And especially in the world of Google and other search engines like it, if you think like the web, you begin to build the web meaningfully. You take advantage of some properties on the web that are actually kind of magical. And by doing so, with the hyperlink as your basis, you're beginning to exercise the franchise of digital citizenship. And this is what I've been trying to bring to my students and looking for ideas about and learning from many other people like John and many fellow educators for a long time. I have taught several times a course that I call From Memex to YouTube, Cognition, Learning, and the Internet. This is what I call a mother blog, which has all the separate blogs that my students are writing in their own spaces, syndicated in by means of web technology to one kind of front page for the class. It's completely bare at the beginning of the semester, and I tell my students, we're going to write the class into being together, and here's where your reflections will appear. using just very simple and open source kinds of technologies. The idea is that the linking begins to happen and the music begins to sound. And once, about 5 years ago, I was very fortunate, sometimes the planets aligned, to have John Udell actually come visit one of my classes, and he talked about how to think like the web. And when he did that, he writes, "On Thursday, I visited Gardner Campbell's class, Link. For me, it was a chance to try to convey to students who are mainly not on the engineering track some key intuitions that arise from the architecture of the web. At one point, I invited them to summon a, Link, grain of sand into existence, name it uniquely, cast it onto the web, and wait for search engines to notice." Very often, it seems if you are on the internet that you are one person vainly shouting into the recesses of interstellar space. And you would think that would be true with all the billions of people who are shouting things onto the internet. But it turns out that the hyperlink starts to make what Udell calls these grains of sand, these individual people writing, sharing, curating things on the web. It will take that little grain of sand on an endless beach and wake it up. Suddenly, that link becomes something that starts to matter in the web of meaningful connections that I would say is the baseline, the foundation of digital citizenship. So I went back after class. It was a great class, but you never know what's going on in your students' minds. And in one of my students' minds was, I think I will try this. And here's what she did. She misspells experience. She's obviously writing very quickly. "I'm going to completely admit that before this class, I knew absolutely nothing about the World Wide Web and internet infrastructure. And honestly, it still confuses me." This is a great breakthrough. Any student who admits confusion is a great breakthrough. I tell them, it's like when the wound itches. It's the first part of the healing. Confusion, it's a knowledge emotion. Don't turn your back on it. Stay with it. Who knew that the web and the internet were different things? I thought they were simply interchangeable words, synonyms that could be looked up on Microsoft Word, but they are different. And when am I surprised when I click on the internet, there are no synonyms for it. It is its own thing, which brings us to what John Udell was saying in class. When it comes to the World Wide Web, our imagination is our only limit. We decide what we want to make. Sounds like a franchise to me. Who we want to share it with and what we want it to mean. Take words, for example. And this was the moment when I had my little teacher out-of-body experience. I just couldn't believe this, Dacolupatoni. When you Google that, nothing comes up. But here is our experiment. Let's search it in a few hours, and probably this will come up, a hyperlink that leads back to this post, which is recursion, which is one of my favorite things. If you've never Googled the word recursion, by all means do that. You'll have 15 seconds of bliss. 10 seconds maybe, it depends on how quickly you can see the thing at the top. And then that person can be linked to this, and it goes on and on. Now, isn't that cool? Well, it turns out it is cool. In 2012, when you Googled Dacolupatoni, nothing came up. In 2017, 5,890 results come up. That little grain of sand, that hyperlink, it woke up. It made a connection. It did something interesting. Google noticed. The franchise was exercised. In fact, it's still going on. There's a tweet from May 2nd. It's now a hashtag, Dacolupatoni. Of course it must be. And over time, as those of us who get intrigued by Dacolupatoni start linking to it, whoa, that grain of sand is wide awake now. In fact, it starts to make other grains of sand wake up. It's just a hyperlink. It was just a hyperlink. And that was everything. For my classes, I like to play with their minds a little bit. I like to appoint a meta team. I say you want to be on the meta team because no other team is an anagram of itself. And they look at me and they're like, but they go with it because, right, I'm an English professor. It's a dangerous job. So there we are, and I say your job among all the bloggers in the class is to blog about the course of the course. You must take the meta view of what we're doing. And when they build their meta team websites for their final projects, it's links, baby. Links, links, links. So many franchise exercises. They built this entire, in 2012, this entire book, all made out of what we had studied, the whole semester. But more than that, their experience of what we had studied, the whole semester. They had this idea that what they would do is take all of the blog posts for each of the authors that we had read during the course. And these are all the student blog posts. And their requirement was do something substantive. That was it. Twice a week. That was it. No prompts, nothing. Do something substantive related to the class twice a week. That's it. Just do that. So they're like, what do you want us to write? And of course, they wanted to know, how long does it have to be? And I'm like, it has to be substantive. It has to be robust. And then I would do things like quote Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. I mean, I can do this all day, right? I just try to frustrate there. How long does it have to be, Dr. Campbell? And I'm like, ah. So they took these blog posts and they made Wordles out of them. So these are all the authors that we read during the class. Each of the authors has a little picture beneath, which is, of course, a hyperlink. And when you click on the hyperlink in the image, let's say McLuhan, for example, who turns out to have been right about most things. Who knew? He was so uncool when I was in grad school. And now it's like, wow, go look on YouTube. McLuhan, very, very high rank. This was the Wordle, made out of words by frequency that the students themselves had blogged during our McLuhan week. And of course, the words there are also links that would link out to Wikipedia entries, link to particular blog posts, link to various information resources the library had, and so forth. All woven, all linked, all very meta. The next year, another meta team. It happened again. I give them very few prompts about this, aside from the anagram thing. So this was what they made, another site, and of course they could see the last year's site because it's on the web. The franchise was exercised. About 4 hours before class, Dr. C, you're going to be amazed by what you're going to see. We're going to rock your world. Now, this is not typical that you'll get a tweet from students excited about their presentation 4 hours before they're going to do it. Usually they're panting and, they make it to class and they're like, well, No. They knew they had something. And the young woman came in to start her part of the presentation, and she left the screen dark. She said, no, I got to do a reveal here. So I'm not going to let you see it right now. I'm just going to start reading the essay I wrote. And she started reading the essay, and I heard the first sentence, and I thought, that's a good sentence. Good writer. That's good. I won't have to do much of that fussy English professor stuff. Second sentence, I thought, that's a really good sentence. Third sentence, I thought, boy, these things sound familiar. Fourth sentence, I realized what she had done. She and her partners on the team had made a meta-essay out of sentences from each of the readings that we had done that semester. And it made sense, which is another way of saying my syllabus made sense. Who knew? And is another way of saying that the student, in what I think of as an almost miraculous act of intellectual synthesis, had understood that the diversity of everything we had read had some important commonalities to establish. So this is actually up on the web now, and about every other sentence in this big meta essay has a link to activities the students had done, links to blog posts, links to videos, links to things that were meaningful for this student. And the compilation of sentences here, in really quite a poetic essay, is itself a spectacular act of linking. So this is the thing. If we exercise our franchise together, it makes each of us better citizens, and it makes all of us better citizens. It makes citizenship stronger when we exercise the franchise. It makes the web deeper, richer, more musical when we hyperlink. Udell said, "I realized I forgot to mention something when he talked to my class. This power to cast grains of sand into the virtual world and then awaken them is a power that grows as you exercise it. Mine, after many years, is strong. Hers, Lissy's, the young woman who coined Dakolupatoni, which is now apparently part of our language. But thanks to another wonderful property of the web, I can share some of my power with her. Just as the architecture of a nation that has the meaningful franchise of the vote makes us, as a nation, more powerful because we share our power as citizens. In the same way, what Lissy did as her experiment on the World Wide Web with the rest of us who saw it, linked to it, began to promote it, became a way of sharing our power with her as well. This is digital citizenship as a functional concept. This is citizen as a verb. There are many, many other things we want our students to be able to do wisely and well on the World Wide Web. But the thing I want them to be able to do, most of all, is to be able to help build that web, to be weavers of that web, meaningful contributors who do not think of themselves as shouting into the void, but think of themselves as initially perhaps a tiny grain of sand, one person, one vote, but someone over time, as that franchise is awakened and exercised, as a citizen in the nation of this global light-speed telecommunications network that we have built for ourselves, is able to connect, to sense meaning, to make that meaning, to share that meaning, and make us all stronger thereby. Thank you.
At the Rose Hill campus, and one of the things that librarians are really, really concerned about is citation. And maybe citation is the old-fashioned hyperlink, but it doesn't have to be the old-fashioned hyperlink. We as a community can exercise our franchise. We can be connected as a community and more powerful by participating in our research repository. And we're very, very concerned and interested for all of you here to learn more about the research repository. We're interested in your feedback, why you might use it, why you might not use it, any thoughts you have about it. We have a survey over here. Two of our librarians, Jeannie and Shira, are at a table and eager to have mobile devices that you can do the survey on, or you can just give them an email, or they have old-fashioned paper forms if that's what you prefer. But it's so important because we are part of a scholarly community, and those connections, that citation, that is how you know that you reach the rest of the people in your community. And on the web, it might be a hyperlink, but in the scholarly discourse, it's the citation. It's whether you're being cited.
So that's a splendid point. I will add to that when I try to tell my students what a hyperlink is, I will often say it's a footnote. And a footnote is a hyperlink, but you just can't click on it. And a web is like a library, and a library is like a web. We do this as human beings constantly. There's a great book David Weinberger wrote called Too Big to Know, which tries to get at what everybody always asks. How can you do all of this? How do you know, I once had a person come up to me after a talk and say, do you do anything physical? Which I thought was kind of a rude question in a way. I don't know, I just met her. But the idea is that we live in these realms that are too big for us to know, and we generate ways to signal connections. A repository is another great example, and I would recommend an article called Toward the Internet of the Mind by a fellow named Guedon, Guedon. And the idea there has to do with this open access concept that when more scholarly materials are actually out from behind paywalls and are able to be connected to and woven together freely, that we end up with something that's extremely powerful. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Librarians, the guardians of the analog web since Alexandria. Yes?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm also a librarian. Okay, thank you. This is maybe a little off topic, but I'm wondering if you have a comment you'd like to make about the work of the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine in particular. One really dramatic instance of the effectiveness of the work of these people is the capturing of a post made by, I think, a Russian militant group, which had brought down an airliner over the Ukraine, thinking that it was a military cargo plane, I think. The post was removed like a couple of hours later, but it had been captured by the Internet Archive, the people working at that organization. So I wonder if you'd like to comment on
The Internet Archive
is
is...
digital citizenship
Yep.
at its best, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think in many ways the Internet Archive is the Library of Congress of the web. Brewster Kahle, who founded the Internet Archive in the 1990s, a very far-sighted individual. And I've actually been there and taken the tour, which if you ever get the chance to do it, it's in San Francisco. You absolutely should do it. Brewster's office has head librarian over the top of it, so he conceives of his role as a librarian. And the Internet Archive, if you haven't been there, it's at archive.org. Its mission is essentially to preserve the web and to help us understand in an environment that's very fluid, volatile, and things do disappear, what our past was. And it actually, now if you go to Wikipedia and there's a link that was dead, often it will now link to a page that was captured by the Internet Archive. I've rescued old web-based assignments that way that were on a server at a school I worked at 3 or 4 years ago. It's really very interesting and priceless what the Internet Archive is doing. So I can't say enough good things about the Internet Archive. And if you haven't been to archive.org, please go. It's a vital resource.
Yes, I'm Bill Baker. I'm the speaker following you. I'm a little sorry about that, but, I don't like following such a good speaker. At any rate, but I do have I have many comments about what you said, but I'm only going to give one. And one is that I wanted to underline something that you may not know. And you mentioned warmly Marshall McLuhan. And I feel the same way, and I'm older than you are, and he was not cool when he was supposed to be. And it turns out virtually everything he said was accurate. The medium is the message and all that stuff. What you probably don't know is that he was a professor here at Fordham. And he was also at the University of Toronto, which was his main school, but he spent, I think, several years here at Fordham.
I did not know that, and I was afraid that I would have to follow you. So, I mean, WNET, or I could follow the Wikimedia education people. That would be hard as well. But anyway, thank you for that. And I did not know that about Marshall McLuhan. Like a lot of people who came through grad school in the 80s, I knew him mostly from Annie Hall, where, it's every grad student's dream you'd be able to pull the author out from behind a sandwich board and disprove some blowhard who was bloviating about a particular theory. But no, it is, if you haven't read any of the Gutenberg Galaxy or Understanding Media, please find an excerpt and read it. I mean, McLuhan was eerily prescient. He's not always easy to understand. He is probably the William Blake of communication theory. So if you know any Blake, you might know that, oh, that's interesting, kind of untamed, but truly brilliant and an astonishing thinker. I did not know he was here. That really is quite a lovely thing to know. Thank you.
Lindsay is going to read a few questions that came via the application. Okay, so one of the first ones was about digital literacy and how it was implied. In the hyperlink example, knowing the hyperlink is, how to make one, how to use it, and read URLs are all digital literacy skills. Using hyperlinks deliberately, meaningfully, and freely is digital citizenship. Could you talk a little bit more about the place, meaning of digital literacy within the context of digital citizenship, within the context of digital literacy?
Sure. I think so. So you have to know your ABCs. You do well to know some things about grammar, although typically most people will speak in a roughly grammatically correct way in their native language. Writing becomes more challenging because it's an abstracted activity from conversation. But those are all things that are good to know. Digital citizenship would then be having something to say and making the presence of your voice meaningful. So I would say that using hyperlinks well is at that next stage where you begin to make meaningful connections and make your presence felt with this magic of the web's architecture that will wake up that link and make it discoverable.
Okay, I'm going to read 2 more questions, and then I think we'll wrap up. But there is a question about obtaining your slides, so if you want to talk to me afterwards, I can put them in the mobile app. One of them is, what is the age of entry into this franchise? That is, should those who may not understand the liability of sharing misinformation, such as preteens, be allowed entry? And the last question are high-priced textbooks the opposite of digital citizenship resources?
So I'll take them in reverse order. Yes? Absolutely. Open educational resources is like open access in that we're all, as a community of thinkers and scholars, kind of waking up now to the fact that it doesn't make a lot of sense to generate wonderful ideas and great ways of thinking about various subjects and then selling them to people who will sell them back to us at about 4,000% markup. If not to us, then to our students. So the answer to the second question is yes. And the answer to the first question, that's a very interesting question. And a kind of a difficult one in a way, but maybe not as difficult as it seems. People tend to think that being out on the internet means one thing and one thing only. So I get a lot of questions about FERPA with my students. I get a lot of, people will say, well, you're exposing them to all these predators on the internet and so forth. We've never really had a lot of spam on posts about cognition, learning, and the internet. We didn't have any spam at all on the poetry course I just taught, where people were scanning poems, putting those up on the web, and also performing the poem and saying why did they choose to perform it in a particular way. The platform that we use at VCU, we call Rampages. We're the VCU Rams, so that seemed to be working well. And students can actually appear pseudonymously on these web pages because they're not hooked into the central student information system. So if they choose, one of my students, for example, wanted to be Ovenbird Skeptic. She typed too quickly. She didn't like the Frost poem for some reason. I can't remember why. And she left out the S, so it was Ovenbird Keptic, and then she decided just to leave it that way. So if I didn't tell you who she was, you wouldn't know, right? The other thing is what you're writing about may invite all sorts of inflammatory conversation, or it may not, depending on how you frame it and what you're writing about. So I think even for kids in their teens, maybe even preteens, with the appropriate identity protections, there are many opportunities for people to do this kind of linking and exercise this franchise even at a fairly early age and have it out on the open web. The thing, in my view, to do is not shut people off into a private space so much as it is to scaffold the experience of a public space in ways that are not going to put people at undue risk. The other part of this, of course, is that if we are concerned about protecting our teenagers from the web, that ship sailed a long, long time ago. We will do the best we can. I do think that it's important for them to learn meaningful ways of being on the internet, and that we have a role to play in that. I'm reminded of a really great website that came up in the Middle East. It was MideastYouth.com. And the idea was that young people would use this site as a way to weave these webs of meaning and to make their voices heard to try to bring peace to that troubled region. And I met the founder of MideastYouth.com at a conference, and I said, don't you have people spoofing their identities on this site? Don't you have people who are deliberately trying to sabotage your work? How do you do that? How do you protect what you're doing to make sure that it's only the real stuff? And I thought what she would tell me is they would have elaborate kinds of, two-factor authentication or whatever. And she didn't say that. She said something I still think about, which is, we just put out more good stuff. Meaning that, though it is not a complete answer, one way to make the web better is to put more great stuff on the web, rather than simply trying to close everything down. For a lot of reasons, I think our impulse is to huddle. And higher ed has certainly been a huddle area in many of its traditions. However, it's a big and complex world. We have, I think, an important leadership role to play in that big and complex world. And whether you're a private institution or a public institution, as VCU is, higher learning has never been more important and never more widely misunderstood, it seems to me. So it might be nice to weave that web a little more aggressively ourselves and help to tell our story, too.